Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layak Siddiqui, the father of holophase. F Pattern Science, the complete foundation. Part 13, How a global F pattern exists. Atlas, overlap, and stitching. There comes a moment in every serious search for understanding when a quiet but enormous question appears. If all knowledge begins locally, how does anything global ever become known? This question sounds simple, but it reaches into everything. You stand in one place and look at a mountain. You do not see the whole mountain. You see one face of it. Another person stands on the other side and sees a different face. A climber on the ridge sees something else. A pilot above it sees another pattern again. A geologist with instruments sees structures neither hiker can see. A satellite sees the mountain as part of a much larger terrain. No one sees the whole in one act, and yet we still speak of one mountain. How? That is the task of this part. Up to now, we have built the local side of pattern science very carefully. We learned that pattern is primary. We learned that phi is primitive comparability. We learned that phi is circular, so absolute labels are not public. We learned that only relations, differences, and lawful invariants belong to public pattern knowledge. We learned that every claim comes through a window. We learned that local change is read through lifts and carriers. We learned that local pattern has layered signatures. We learned that time, space, and motion are readouts of one differentiated pattern. We learned that operations do not work everywhere, that domains must be declared, that excisions must be marked, that aliasing can counterfeit a pattern, and that boundaries are part of the pattern itself. All of that was necessary, because now we can finally ask the next serious question. If every view is local, how does a whole pattern exist globally? The answer is one of the most beautiful answers in the entire framework. A global phi pattern exists through the lawful stitching of local descriptions across overlaps. Not by magic, not by assumption, not because one privileged observer sees everything, not because a hidden absolute map already exists in the sky. A global pattern exists publicly when many local descriptions can be connected lawfully, consistently, and honestly. This is the Atlas principle. Why no single window can ever be enough. Let us begin with something ordinary. Imagine you are trying to understand a large city you have never visited before. You are given one photograph of one street corner. The photo is sharp, it is detailed. It shows a bakery, a traffic light, a bus stop, and a narrow road turning left. Is that enough to know the city? No. So you take another photograph from another neighborhood, then another, then another. Soon you have thousands of images. Some are taken in sunlight, some at night, some in winter, some in summer. Some show buildings, some show parks, some show alleys, some show bridges. Now you have something richer. But do you yet have the city? Still no. What you have are many local views. To get the city, those views must be connected. The street in one image must continue into the road in another. The bridge visible in one district map must align with the river visible in the next. The neighborhoods must meet. The transit lines must join. The names must correspond. The scales must be reconcilable. Only then does a global city begin to exist for public knowledge. This is exactly the situation in phi pattern science. Every observation is local. Every window is finite. Every chart is partial. Every measurement is situated. This is not a defect to be repaired later. It is the deep structure of public knowing. No single window sees the whole. No single lift captures the entire pattern. No single boundary story exhausts the global form. No single local signature contains the totality. The whole must be built from lawful relations among partial views. The Atlas Principle. A child can understand the basic idea of an atlas. A world atlas does not contain one gigantic map that perfectly shows every road, every river, every mountain, every village, and every cloud all at once. That would be impossible. Instead, it contains many maps. A map of Africa, a map of Europe, a map of India, a map of one country, a map of one city, a map of one subway line. Each map is local. Each map has its own scale. Each map emphasizes some things and ignores others. Each map is useful within a range. But the atlas works because the maps are not random. They are related. Where they overlap, they can be translated into one another. That is the key idea. In five-pattern science, a global pattern is like a world that can only be publicly known through an atlas of local descriptions. One pattern, many charts, lawful overlaps, declared transitions, stitched identity. That is what global means here. Global does not mean seen all at once. Global does not mean given in advance. Global does not mean absolute description from nowhere. Global means what survives lawful passage from one local description to another across all declared overlaps. What a chart is. We need a simple word for one local description. That word is chart. A chart is a local readable patch of pattern under declared conditions. It includes where we are looking, what window we used, what domain is lawful, what excisions are in place, what boundaries matter, what lift or representation was chosen if needed, and what local signature can actually be read there. A chart does not claim to be the whole pattern. It claims only to be one lawful local face of it. That humility is not weakness, it is honesty. If a chart pretends to be the whole, it has already become untrustworthy. Why overlap matters. Now we arrive at the heart of the matter. If you have many charts, how do you know they belong to one pattern rather than many unrelated ones? The answer is overlap. Where two local charts cover some of the same region, they must be comparable there. Not necessarily identical, not in exactly the same symbols, not in exactly the same coordinates, not in exactly the same lift, but they must be lawfully relatable. This is a subtle but crucial point. Suppose one chart describes a road using meters, and another describes the same road using feet. The descriptions are not identical, but they are lawfully relatable. There is a declared rule that connects them. Or suppose one local phi description uses one lift and another uses a different local lift. Again, the descriptions need not match symbol for symbol. But if they are descriptions of the same pattern, then on the overlap, there must be a lawful transition between them. The overlap is where this is tested. The overlap is where honesty happens. The overlap is where one local story meets another and must prove that both are truly stories of one pattern. The transition is part of the structure. At first glance, it may seem that the local charts matter, but the transitions between them are just bookkeeping. That would be a mistake. The transition between charts is not a boring administrative detail. It is part of the global pattern itself. Think of sewing pieces of cloth into one garment. The cloth pieces matter, yes, but the stitching also matters. A coat is not just pieces of fabric lying near each other. It becomes one coat because the pieces are joined in lawful ways. Similarly, a global pattern is not just a pile of local charts. It is a lawful network of charts plus the transition relations that connect them. In fact, sometimes the deepest structure of the pattern is not visible in any single chart, but only in the transitions. This is where part 13 becomes profound, because global identity is not merely local content added together. It is local content plus lawful passage between locals. A simple story, the book with torn pages. Imagine a very old book whose pages have been torn apart and scattered. You find page 8 in one room, page 9 in another, page 27 in a drawer, page 28 under a chair. Each page carries part of the story, but the story is not yet global. How do you reconstruct the book? You look for overlaps. Maybe one torn page ends with half a sentence and another begins with the rest. Maybe the paper fibers align. Maybe the same ink, style, and numbering system appear on both. Maybe one page mentions an event that another continues. The overlap is not always large, but where continuity exists, lawful stitching becomes possible. Eventually, from scattered local fragments, a global story emerges. Not because any one page contained the whole, not because you guessed, but because many partial pieces were lawfully stitched through overlap. This is exactly how global five-pattern identity works. What local agreement can miss? Now we must go deeper. Even if every local chart is lawful, something important can still hide from any single chart. A single neighborhood on the Earth does not reveal that the Earth is round. A tiny patch on a Mobius strip does not reveal that the strip has a twist. A local measurement on a loop does not reveal that going all the way around stores a global winding. A local chart may look perfectly smooth even when the global object carries a topological defect. This is one of the deepest lessons of the Atlas principle. Some truths are global and do not live in any single local patch. You only discover them when you try to stitch all the locals together. One chart may look ordinary. A second chart may also look ordinary. Their overlap may also look ordinary. But after moving through many charts around the loop, you may return and discover that the total transition carries memory. That memory is global structure, and it cannot be reduced to one local chart. Why this matters for pattern science? This matters because without the Atlas principle, people make a very common mistake. They see something in one local patch and assume it is the whole pattern. They see a local regularity and call it a global law. They see a local symmetry and call it universal. They see a local alignment and call it absolute structure. But local agreement is not global identity. A pattern may agree locally, yet differ globally. A structure may be smooth locally, yet twisted globally. Two descriptions may match in every small patch and still disagree in how the whole is put together. Part 13 protects the framework from this mistake. It says, do not assume the whole from one patch. Do not assume global identity from local convenience. Do not confuse looks the same here with is the same everywhere. Stitch first, certify later. A mountain seen from many sides. Let us return to the mountain. A hiker on the north side describes dense forest, shadow, cold streams, and steep, dark slopes. A hiker on the south side describes dry grass, sunlight, exposed rock, and gentler ascent. A climber on the summit ridge describes sharp wind, broken stone, and the joining of two long faces. At first, the reports seem different, perhaps even contradictory. Is it one mountain or two? The answer does not come from choosing one witness as absolute. It comes from overlap. The ridge seen by the climber connects the two sides. The streams on the north side originate from snowfields near the summit. The southern rock layer wraps around and appears again in a cliff visible from the east. One geological survey links all the local descriptions into one continuous body. Suddenly, the mountain exists globally, not because one person saw everything, but because many local descriptions could be lawfully stitched. That is the Atlas principle in human form. Perspective is not denied but disciplined. A weak framework tries to deny perspective. It pretends that perspective is a problem that must disappear. It dreams of a view from nowhere. Phi-pattern science does not do that. It accepts that all access is perspective shaped. All windows are finite. All charts are local. All descriptions are situated. But it refuses to let perspective become chaos. So it disciplines perspective through overlap. You may use one chart, I may use another. Your local language may differ from mine. Your lift may differ from mine. Your coordinate story may differ from mine. That is acceptable. But in overlap, our descriptions must be lawfully relatable. This is a powerful middle path, not naive absolutism, not relativism, disciplined perspectival publicness. We do not say every view is equally true. We do not say only one privileged view counts. We say, if these are views of one public pattern, their overlaps must certify lawful compatibility. That is much stronger. The Atlas map. To make this rigorous, the framework requires an Atlas map. An Atlas map is not the pattern itself. It is the declared structure of how the local charts are arranged. It tells us which charts exist, what regions they cover, where they overlap, what excisions remain, what boundaries matter, and what transition rules connect one chart to another. Without this, global pattern becomes hand-waving. With it, global construction becomes public, checkable, and auditable. You can inspect the charts, you can inspect the overlaps, you can inspect the transitions, you can check whether the stitching truly works. That is how a global claim becomes certifiable. The overlap gate. Because this is so important, Part 13 installs a formal discipline, the overlap gate. The question of the overlap gate is simple. Have the charts, overlap regions, and transition relations been declared clearly enough to justify a global claim? If not, the claim must not pass. This is because global talk without overlap discipline is one of the easiest ways to smuggle false totality. A person says, these local results clearly describe one global structure. But do the overlaps agree? Have the transitions been shown? Are the excisions honest? Do the boundaries cohere? Is the same pattern really being tracked? If these questions are unanswered, the global claim is not yet lawful. Firewalls against global confusion. Part 13 places several strong firewalls around global reasoning. First, no assuming that local agreement automatically gives global identity. Second, no hidden transition conventions. If a conversion, gauge relation, lift change, coordinate rule, or interpretive bridge is used to connect charts, it must be declared. Third, no mistaking a chart-specific artifact for a global feature. Something visible in one chart may be due to local representation, local sampling, or local boundary handling. Fourth, no stitching across incompatible overlaps. If two charts cannot be lawfully related in their overlap, they cannot be certified as parts of one global pattern. These are not technical annoyances. They are how the science protects itself from fantasy. A deeper example, the seam in a shirt. Think of a shirt. If you lay the fabric flat before sewing, you see separate pieces, front, back, sleeves, collar. Each piece makes sense locally. Each has its own shape, each has its own boundaries. But a shirt is not just those pieces. It becomes a shirt only through seams. And those seams do more than connect, they reveal structure. A sleeve is not a flat patch. It must be attached at a particular angle and curvature to the torso. The collar must join the neck opening in a particular way. The shoulder seam determines drape and fit. The transitions are constitutive. If the seams are wrong, the shirt is not one lawful garment. It puckers, twists, tears, or fails to fit. This is exactly what stitching means in global pattern science. The global pattern is not just local pieces. It is the lawful seam structure through which the pieces become one. What global identity really means. We are now ready to say something very precise in simple language. Global pattern identity is not one giant hidden picture somewhere behind all charts. Global pattern identity is the invariant pattern that survives lawful movement through an atlas of local descriptions. In other words, if you can move from chart to chart across declared overlaps using declared transition rules and keep tracking one coherent structure, then a global pattern exists publicly. That is a much stronger and more disciplined meaning of whole. The whole is not assumed. The whole is earned. Why this prepares topology? At the end of this part, something important is waiting just beyond the door. Once you begin stitching charts, you may discover that loops through the atlas do not close trivially. You may discover winding. You may discover non-trivial holonomy. You may discover that something is remembered globally that no local patch contains. This is topology beginning to appear. Part 13 does not yet fully develop topology, but it installs the exact machinery needed for it. Without atlas, overlap, and stitching, topology would sound mystical. With them, it becomes almost inevitable. Because topology is what appears when lawful local stitching carries non-trivial global memory. Everyday life and global identity. This is not only abstract science, it is also life. Think about understanding a person. No single conversation reveals a whole human being. No one moment shows the total pattern. One friend sees one side, a sibling sees another, a co-worker sees another, a child sees another, a partner sees another. If these local views can be stitched lawfully, a more global human pattern begins to emerge. But if the overlaps fail completely, something important is revealed. Perhaps the person is fragmented. Perhaps the observers are mistaken. Perhaps a hidden transition convention is smuggling interpretation. Perhaps there is a real global twist that no one local relation revealed. Again, the whole person is not seen from nowhere. It is stitched through lawful overlap. The same is true of communities, cultures, ecologies, and histories. Global understanding is always an atlas achievement. What this part establishes. By the end of part 13, several decisive things have been installed. First, the atlas principle. No single local chart captures the whole. A global phi pattern exists through lawful stitching of many local descriptions. Second, the overlap obligation. Charts need not be identical, but in overlap, they must be lawfully relatable. Third, the transition doctrine. The relation between charts is itself part of the global structure. Fourth, the global humility rule. No global claim may be assumed simply from one local success. Fifth, the discipline perspective principle. Perspective is not denied, but regulated through compatibility. These are not small results. They are the architecture of global public knowledge. 19. Refusal conditions. This part also gives us clear refusal conditions. A global claim must be refused if the charts are not declared, the overlap regions are not specified, the transition rules are hidden, the overlaps fail compatibility, or a local feature is promoted to a global truth without lawful stitching. This refusal is not negativity, it is protection. It protects the framework from fake wholeness. It protects us from pretending that fragments already form a world. It protects the distinction between local convenience and global truth. 20. The road ahead. Now we are ready. We have local charts, we have overlaps, we have transition rules, we have stitching, so the next question becomes unavoidable. What happens when we move around a closed path through the atlas and return changed? What does it mean when local smoothness hides global memory? What is revealed when stitching cannot be made trivial? That is where the next deep phase of phi pattern appears. That is where topology begins to speak. That is where winding, holonomy, and global memory emerge. And now, at last, the framework is ready to hear them. Always, Peche vi aponio.